Okay, so we will be continuing with the discussion on drawing techniques in this chapter. So we have used listeners to identify what happens with the certain activities, and then, for example, the button click, and then we were doing some certain task based on the event that we were listening. In this part of the class, we will be dealing with the sources of the events. So let's say there are two buttons. Which button clicked? Which button have been clicked? We will be doing something based on that decision. So we will see the left-right Java, which has two buttons basically, and then based on the button that has been pressed, we will be updating a label. So let's see this code. Left, right. So this is how it looks like. So you have a push button, and then based on which one of the buttons you push, it is going to update the label as left or right. And so as you can see, there must be an event listener which is going to listen to events that happen. So what are the events that it is going to listen? The button clicks or pushes that you have. So you need to provide both of the button clicks as an event, such that when one of the buttons have been clicked, this label will be updated with the correct text that you would like to print on the screen. So if it is the left button, it is going to update the text to be left, otherwise it will update it to be the right. So we have again the left-right panel, which is extending the J panel, so it's inheriting the properties of the J panel. And then you add, you have the instance variables here, the J button, two buttons left and right, and then you have a label which you print initially, press a button and then update it left and right. So that's the label. And then we have a button panel which we are going to put everything into and then show them on the screen. So when you look into the left-right panel, we have the new button, new J button with a label left, and then I have another button with a label right. So I have those two buttons, those two J buttons created in my panel. And I have a listener which is going to listen to both of these events. So I have this listener, which we will see shortly. New button listener, I create this object. It is going to be listening to those two buttons, left and right. So I will have left add action listener. So I'm going to add a listener to my button, which is this listener. So it will be listening to the activities on this left button. And then I have a right button, which is again going to have a listener that is going to listen the activities going on. So label, we create the label with an initial text with push a button. And I create my panel, this button panel as a new J panel. I set the preferred size to be the size what I'd like to see there. And then the color is blue. I add those two buttons, button left and button right, with an add statement, add method. And I set the preferred size to be 200 by 80, and then I set the background to the new color, and I have the label that is added on top of that, and I have the button panel added at the end of it as well. So I first have the button panel, which has a certain feature, which is going to be the first panel I create, and then the two buttons. So if you go back to the example, there are two panels on this case. On this one, what are the two panels? The first one is this one, which has the two buttons on it with a blue color, and then another panel, which is basically the outermost panel, which has this panel plus the label. Okay, so this part is actually the internal panel, the smaller panel I have. New J panel with the dimensions 200 by height 40, and I have the color blue and has both buttons left and right. And then on top of that, I add this button panel onto the other panel to have the label plus this button panel. Right? So it has this button panel added to the whole thing. So basically you create this panel, put it on the outermost panel at the end. Any question? So the main thing here is that you have seen that kind of buttons and adding panels already, but the main important thing is that our button listener, which listens to the activities, implements the action listener. Again, this is an interface. We will be covering that shortly. We have an action perform method which we need to implement, and it takes an event. If the button is clicked, what is going to happen? These are going to happen. If event get source is equal to left, if the source of this event is the left button, update my text, the labels text with the left. Otherwise, it must be the right button that it generates. I will set the label text to the right button. So if you want to, for example, add another button and then use that too, you can do that. You'll just need to set the certain source for that, and you will have another if-else statement there. So this, provides a useful implementation in your programs and applications also. So if you'd like to, use a certain button to do a certain task, you can easily implement it using this kind of method. So this is again a different way of implementing it, because it selects an event source from wherever it happens. So we will see dialog boxes. So you can, using a dialog box, you can convey information, perform an action, or allow the user to enter data, pick a color, or choose a file. You can do lots of many things with dialog boxes. I will show an example of it shortly. So if you look into this even odd application, it uses the JOption pane class, which provides this. So let's see, evenodd.java. So what it does is it determines if the value input by the user is even or odd, uses multiple dialog boxes for user interaction. So let's see. So it's a dialog box and it's asking for an integer. So I just type there 12, and then it tells me that number is even, and that's not done yet. It's asking select an option, do another one, yes or no. If I ask yes again, I can enter 11, that number is odd, and then I click OK, do another one, no, and then I just finish execution. So the whole thing is finished with this no selection. So when you look into the implementation of this, as you can see, there's a string, number, string, and a result, and two integer values, number and again, which basically again checks whether you would like to process another number or not. And you have a do while, which is basically the usual way of implementing menus for user interaction. So you first enter the first time, because since do while loop executes at least once, you would like to show it to the user at least once, and you do that. If the user doesn't want to continue, you stop it there, otherwise you continue doing that. So you get the show input dialog. So you have an input dialog that you create in the JOption pane, enter an integer. So the user is asked to enter an integer, and then you read the integer from the number string, which is read from the user. Again, that was the dialog box which we entered the number first. So you can use JOption pane to ask a user to enter a certain value, and then whenever the user enters, that is copied into the number string, which is going to be a string, and then you convert this number, the string, into the corresponding integer value with the parseInt static method, right? So I have the integer parseInt method, which is basically going to convert the string into the corresponding value. And the result, which I would like to generate as an output to the user, I say that that number is, I will concatenate whatever is generated here, number, and then I get the modulus with 2. If it is equal to 0, what would I do? I would select even, because it's a Boolean condition, right? It will evaluate to either true or false. If it is true, which means it's an even, I will concatenate onto this one, the number is even. Otherwise, I will concatenate the odd portion of it. So remember, this is a comparator operator which had 3 arguments. The condition, if this is true, I would go with this option. If it is false, I would go with odd. So it will concatenate the correct one, whatever that is, at the end of this line, so that you see that number is odd or even. And J option pane show message dialog. So you have a message dialog with the result, which is the text you have, and you give that as an argument, and it prints it as a message on the screen. And again, is going to take a argument that is entered by the user. So it will have the label do another, okay? And J option pane show confirm dialog. It is going to create a confirmation dialog box on the screen, and then based on that, if the user selects yes, it returns 1. If the user selects no, it will return 0, right? And if the user presses cancel, it will just cancel the whole thing. So when you look into while again equals again J option pane yes option, if the yes option is selected, I will continue doing the loop again over and over. Okay? So these are the null arguments. Actually, you can pass objects to these method calls as the first argument, but you don't need to deal with that at the moment. You can, if you would like to see how it operates, you can read more about these show confirm dialog or show message dialog boxes. So you have seen 3 dialog boxes. One is show input dialog, which shows, which opens up a screen, which opens up a dialog box for the user to enter a text, and then it shows a message dialog, which a message is shown on the screen for the user, and then a confirmation dialog, which just asks for user to confirm to continue or not. So it's basically a really simple implementation. However, obviously it uses the Java created objects that are already available within the J option pane. Okay, any question? So you have for the different option panes, you have yes option, no option, and cancel option as well, if you would like to choose whichever from you would like to choose. So we will be seeing them in chapter 9 in more details for choosing colors and files. So checkbox, it's a button that can be toggled on or off, which is used represented using by the checkbox class. So unlike a push button, which you generate an event, in checkbox you generate an item event. So you check one of the items that are available from the list. So we use item listener to listen to these checkboxes, and I will show you an example to indicate what we mean. And in a checkbox, you have item state changed. So which means if the user selected a certain option and then he or she switches to another option among those checkbox options, then it is going to activate this event. Item state will be changed, which means you can do a certain task based on that event. We will see shortly. So style options.java is an example. Style options panel. So as you can see, you have say it with style, obviously a label on the panel, and then you have an item selection here, checkbox. Whichever checkbox is selected, it will do a certain task. So whenever I say bold, it will make it bold, and then whenever I do a deselect, it is going to again call the listener. When the listener is called, what is going to happen? It is going to create a new font with a bold face, right? So it's going to convert the regular thing to a bold, and then we'll have this printed again. So whenever you say italic, it's going to create this italic font, and then you can combine both if you would like. So that's something you can play around with. And let's look at the code for this. Again, we have the frame creation for the style options, and then we add the panel, which is the style options panel. So let's see the style options panel. And as you can see with the constructor, we have the saying, which is a string. So let me go up a little bit. So you have a label, JLabel saying, which is the label at the top, and then you have the private J checkbox, bold and italic. So you have two checkboxes. Whenever the box is selected or deselected, you are going to perform the action. So we have the new label created, new JLabel saying with the following text on top of it, say it with style. And then I have the initial font to be set. Since this is the constructor, I set the initial font to new font, and then you give the font name, the bold, italic, or plain. So font.plain is going to be a plain font, and then I set the font size to 36, and I use this font in creating my label and printing on the screen. So when you look into the bold, you create a new J checkbox bold. So you have the check item that says would you like to have a bold, and then you have a background that is set to this color, and then you have an italic checkbox which prints italic, and then you use that checkbox as well. So you have also the listener, the style listener, which is going to basically, again, whether the boxes is checked or not, it is going to listen to that, and based on that, it will update the bold and italic fonts accordingly. So you have bold add item listener. So bold was, if you remember, a checkbox, right? And then italic is also a checkbox. So they're going to have an item listener, which is basically the listener listens to that. And I have those two bold and italic checkboxes and the label added on my panel. So I have three things added to my panel, which are the label, the first checkbox, and then the second checkbox. And I have the color set to cyan, and then I have the preferred size with 300 by 100. If you look into the style listener, it implements the item listener, which basically listens to activities that's going on in the items. And I have the item state change method, as we had in the action event method. What was the method that we were implementing in that case? In the buttons, for example. Action performed, right? We have the action performed, which is a button click, for example. In this case, since this is a checkbox item, we have an item state change, so which means it was checked, now unchecked, or it was not checked, now it is checked. So you can have a state change when the box is checked. So I have a new style that is font plain, and then if bold is selected, if the bold was selected, I will set my style to be font bold. If italic is selected, I will update my style to be including italic as well. Okay, so basically this is an integer, as you can see, which has certain constant values, right? So if you set the style to be font plain, you set it to a certain integer, and then if you make it bold, you update it to the bold style, which is again an integer. And then you have, if you would like to add italic onto that, what you do is you update your style to include that integer value as well. Okay. And then when you look into the set font, you set the font of this label to the new font which you just created with Helvetica, and then the style, which is an integer value indicating whether it is bold and italic, or it is plain and italic, or it's just it's just plain. Okay. So the font size is also set to be 36 at the end. So if you check or uncheck this checkbox, this method will be activated, and then corresponding font will be generated as a result. Any question?
last part again, saying set font.
Saying set font. So what you do is that the label's font is updated with a new font. What is that new font? New font is you create the font by calling this new font object. So you create a font. What is that font? It is based on the name of the font, which is a constant string value. It could be Helvetica, Times, Arial, and any type of font that you know. And then the style indicates the bold, italic, plain, or any combination of those. Okay, that's an integer value which is constructed by looking at the current, whether it's plain or bold, and then adding a value in the italic part. So this number indicates whether it is a bold or italic or plain or any combination of those. Okay, and then you have the font size, which is 36. So you create this font object and then use this font object to set your label's font. So if you look into this, you can ask why we're adding this font.italic on top of what we had before in the style integer number. So it's basically, based on the number, it decides on the new font. So, for example, I don't know the exact numbers for font plain, font bold, and font italic, but it distinguishes one from another one, right? So you can think of it, for example, again, I don't know the exact numbers, but if you consider 1, 2, and 4, you can understand which one is which by looking at the combination of additions. So, for example, if I have 5, there is only one combination that you can tell me which composes this, right? For example, it must be 1 plus 4. If I have 7, you know that it must be a combination of all those 3 numbers, 1, 2, and then 4. If, let's say, it is 3, it must be 1 plus 3. So you have a distinct combination based on this integer. They must have encoded it in that fashion, but I don't know the exact numbers again. Okay? So what could be in this case is that, for example, you may have for plain, it could be 0, right? For bold, as you can see, for bold it is updated the number, so it has a new number. For bold it could be 1, okay? And then if you have italic, if I set it to be, for example, what could be? If I set it to 2, would it be correct? Or maybe we could set it to 1, 2, and 4 to be safe. And in that case, if you have, in this case, it is going to based on the style number. If it is 5, you could say it is plain and italic. If it is plain, italic, and if it is, let's say, 6, you could say bold and italic, and so on. Okay? Any question? So again, the idea is, let me run it again. So whenever I click this action event happens, and then I go into that method and then update the font style with the new font style. And then again, if I do an unclick, it again calls the same method to indicate that there's a change. And then again, this would do the same thing with the italic. Radio buttons. So you can use radio buttons to represent a set of mutually exclusive options. What does mutually exclusive mean? Mutually exclusive. Not exactly. You have to select either one of them. They cannot be active at the same time. So one of them must be, if one of them is there, you cannot have the others. So mutually exclusive means that. So you have only one that is selected at a certain time, and when a radio button from a group is selected, the button that is currently on is going to be switched to off state. to define the group of radio buttons, you have a button group object which is going to collect those buttons. I will show you the example shortly. Code options. So you have a label that is a JLabel code. Let me first show this on the screen so you know what we are talking about. So take my wife, please. So there are codes. If you want to see a code in comedy, this is what you will see. And again, if you select another radio button, you will say that I think, therefore I am, philosophy type of saying. And then carpentry, measure twice, cut once, is carpentry type of label that is printed on the screen. So based on the radio button you have, you update the label. Again, there must be a listener method which listens all these radio buttons. If one is selected, it will update the, update the label that you have there. So let's go and see the code options here. So I have a comedy code. So let's go up. I have the label code, and then I have the radio button, comedy, philosophy, carpentry, those three buttons that I'm selecting from. And then I have a string, private string, those three strings, the comedy code, philosophy code, and then the carpentry code. So that's the labels that we have. If you look into the constructor, we see that comedy code, take my wife, please, and then you have philosophy code, I think, therefore I am, and then the carpentry code, measure twice, cut once. So I create, initially set the label to be to the comedy code. So I create a new label with the initial string set to comedy code, right? And set the font to whatever that is indicated by Helvetica, bold, and 24. Then what do? I have a comedy, new J radio button, comedy, true. So I create the first button, right, that says comedy. And then it is, initial value is set to be true, such that, you select that one as the first option, right? Since it is selected, the comedy code will be printed on the screen. And then you set the background to be green, and you create another radio button with philosophy. Obviously, this does not have a default value, which means it's not going to have a selected option there. And I have the carpentry, which is also created by a label carpentry on top of that. I create a button group, so it collects more, multiple radio buttons into one single group. So I create my new button group, and I add into this group all those buttons I just created, comedy, philosophy, and carpentry, right? And then I have the code listener, which is a listener. Again, we will see the method, how it is created. This is an object, a listener object, which listens to those radio buttons. So I have this comedy radio button, add action listener. So I add a listener that is going to listen to the events happening on my comedy radio button. So I will be listening with this listener. And then same thing applies to all the remaining radio buttons as well, philosophy and carpentry. And I add all these label first, and then the three what was the name? Three radio buttons. And then I set the background to the color green and set the preferred size to be by 300 by 100. So now I have my panel and all the labels and buttons listed in my panel. So when you look into the listener, again it implements the action listener, which is basically going to do, if there's an event, if one of those is going to be selected, it will, it will update the text. So object source event get source. So it is going to get the object which is the source of the activity. So which one of those radio buttons I clicked will be known by this object. So it will be the source that I'm looking for. So I will get the source and know that which one of these is actually causing the activity. If my source is comedy, I will set my text, the codes, the labels text to comedy code. If it is not the case, however, if the source is philosophy, that means the radio button that I selected was philosophy button, then this text will be updated with philosophy code. Otherwise, the only remaining option is that carpentry code will be the new text, the new label text I will have on my screen. Any question? Again, we have seen before the get source method. Now it is using the same get source. If this event is happening, then what is the source of it? It must be one of these, either comedy, philosophy, or carpentry. If the corresponding event occurs, I will update the text according to that. So whenever I click here, this action, this event happens, so that that method is called with comedy as the source, and then updates the label based on that fact. Any question? So checkboxes provide Boolean option, and then radio buttons, however, work as a group to provide a set of mutually exclusive options. So if you select one of the options in the group, the other ones will be all deselected. So you have only one of them active at a time. So when you look into the chapter 5 topics, we have covered so far the Boolean expressions, the conditional statements, and how to compare data. Again, you have to be careful with comparisons in data. And then the repetition statements, the loops, while loop, do while loop, and the for loop, and their respective properties. And then the iterators, how can you perform a for each loop, and drawing components such as the checkbox and the dialog box, and also the radio buttons we have seen in this chapter. So these will, most importantly, the graphic components of the course will give you a baseline implementation ability to start your projects and start going on with the development of the tools that you are going to try to build in your group members. So is there any question? Okay, so then that's all for today, and then we'll see you. One more announcement, actually. We're not going to have a class tomorrow. Okay, I will be in Europe, so I will be attending a conference. There will not be any class tomorrow. There is no change in the labs, but only my class. There's no class tomorrow for this section. Not Thursday. Sorry.